The establishment of democratic and secular political system and reconstruction and modernization of society based on the principles of egalitarianism and recognition and respect for India's cultural diversity was central to the vision of independent India. The Indian National Congress, which represented the mainstream of the independence movement, adopted the Fundamental Rights and Economic Program in 1931. It also expressed its solidarity with anti-colonial struggle movements of social progress and democracy in other countries and the victim of faces aggression. The ideals of independence movement were reflected in Constitution which came into force in 1950 when India became a republic. In this unit, you will have a comprehensive understanding about the concept of democracy as it has evolved since the dawn of human civilization. You will also come to know as how to democracy can be implanted in the mind of the sensitive child at the school and at home. The various education implications of democracy will also be discussed. You will learn as to how democracy as a way of life can be inculcated in the classroom and in various extracurricular activities of the school and in daily life situations. As you should know, democracy has been interpreted variously by different people. To some, it is a net result of historical evolution of mankind. Some others have seen it as a mode of human governance. There are still some thinkers who would club democracy as a social need. Democracy is about the self-determination of human beings. Last but not least, many others would like to democracy as a way of life. Let us at very outset briefly highlight the various conceptualizations of democracy. Let us try to understand some ideas about the notion of democracy from representatives' definitions. Lord Bryce believes that democracy really means nothing more or less than the rule of the whole people expressing their sovereign will by their votes. According to Seeley, democracy is a government in which everyone has a share. Dicey believes democracy is a form of government in which the governing body is a comparatively large fraction of the entire nation. Sartori says a democratic political system is one that makes the government responsive and accountable, and its effectiveness depends first and foremost on the efficiency and skill of its leadership. Lipset believes democracy is political system which supplies regular constitutional opportunities for changing the government officials and social mechanism which permits the largest possible part of the population to influence the decisions by choosing among contenders for political office. Macpherson believes democracy is merely a mechanism for choosing and authorizing governments or in some other way getting laws and political decision made. McClure observes democracy is not a way of governing whether by majority or otherwise, but primarily a way of determining who shall govern and broadly what ends. Worms believes democracy as an ideal society of equals in the sense that each is an integral and irrepressible part of the whole. Harold Lasky is of the opinion a democratic state no longer provides the technique of peaceful change in the existing era of transition from capitalism to socialism. It is also an illusion to think that the liberal state has worked in the interest of an overwhelming majority of the community. To Karl Marx, democracy has been referred to as an association in which the free development of each is the condition of the free development of all. Lenin believes democracy is of enormous importance to the working class in its struggle against the capitalists for its emancipation. It is one of the stages on the road from the feudalism to capitalism and from capitalism to communism. Some of them try to historize the idea of democracy, while some others try to concretize it. Bryce, for instance, treats it a broad ideal to be realized in due course of time. Those who regard democracy as a mechanism are Stan Peter, Dahl, Lin Lam, Peter Buchart. There are yet some others who would like to regard democracy as a value that is ends and means. For instance, Macpherson, while discussion about democracy, highlights on the mutual development of human beings. To him, by granting freedom to the people, democracy transforms them as possessor. At the same time, democracy also considers human beings as creators, thereby encouraging the creative faculties in them. Most of the scholars have seen democracy from a historical perspective. Its gradual development from feudalism and finally with the emergence of socialist democracy, a full circle has been completed. Even after the setbacks in the formal USSR and Eastern Europe, scholars in post-Soviet debates have continued to regard democracy as a value. They have also welcomed the emergence of new institutional mechanisms in the democratic states. On a critical evaluation of the above-mentioned definitions, let us then identify some of the major characteristics of democracy. Democracy is a multifaceted concept and it embraces several elements, namely political ideas, economic and social forces, ethical principles, forms and government and way of life. Democratic government, as is understood in the West, aims at securing maximum liberty for its citizens. The principles of equality goes hand in hand with the principle of liberty under democratic government. A democratic government gives opportunities to all to take part in political and socio-economic matters. The term democracy is derived from Greek word demos, that is people, and kratos is power. In other words, it is the government of the people, by the people and for the people. Democracy stands for a rule of the majority with adequate safeguards to the minorities. Out of the several national and state level parties, any single party or a combination of parties which capture a majority of seats in the Lok Sabha or in a Vidhan Sabha can form the government. Democracy has to safeguard the basic rights of the people and serve as a doom of public welfare. As E.M. Burns writes in his book Ideals of Conflict, transformed in accordance with modern intellectual discoveries, the ideal would have virtually limitless possibilities for leading mankind into promised land to freedom and abundance. Under the aegis of democracy, science would have the power to lift burdens of war, famine, poverty and disease. Democracy means a government by discussion. It is also regarded by government, by consent or by public criticism. It is said that no man has right to be governed except by his own consent. By consent we mean not to consent to every law but consent to person who makes the law. Democracy is not only a form of government but also a way of life. Popular sovereignty and freedom to live as one pleases go together, and democratic government, the dignity of the human personality, is fully recognized. Democracy goes beyond frontiers of democratic country to enter the realm of the international affairs. In the international sphere, democracy stands for the principle of self-determination and for the regulation of interstate relations on the basis of equality, justice, and reason. It is against any type of aggressive nationalism, imperialism, and war. In other words, democracy also supports democratization of international relations, which is one of the stipulated goals of non-alignment. The Indian Constitution approaches democracy as an ideal form of government determined by rule of majority, defending basic rights of citizens. Democracy is traditionally associated with coexistence of ideas, with right to differ, and with resolution of ideological differences not by bullet but by ballot. Through periodic elections, one idea becomes time front, and this is the ruling idea of the community. Thus, the political authority through the operation of democracy becomes responsive to the dominant idea of the community. It assures in democracy the control of the civil society or the government. Political parties are the vehicles of the ideas. Plurality of ideas, to which democracy is by its nature hospitable, involves plurality of parties. Parties are the principal media through which the ideas flow from the social reservoir into the system of the state and twin wheels of political machinery in that system. Thus, parties act as a bridge between the civil society and the political mechanism of governance. Thus, we can find from the above discussion that the necessary conditions on which the democratic method of governance depends are coexistence of ideas, the right to free discussion, universal adult suffrage, and periodical elections. Democracy as an ideal refers not only to the democratic government but also to the democratic society. Democracy is associated with peaceful competition of ideas. This requires the dominance of reasons in human relations. The rule of force is hostile to the spirit of democracy, for it is destructive of reason. Hence, democratic ideal is a society where reason dominates. In a truly democratic society, every man feels himself capable of contributing something unique to the common flow of ideas and feeling by participating in the process of discussion. One way to agree with Burns when he observes that democracy as an ideal society of equals in the sense that each is an integral and irreparable part of the whole. Moreover, democracy implies moral responsibilities, each other's actions. Any action of a government, any democracy means an action by the chosen representatives of the people, and hence in ultimate analysis, it involves the modern responsibility of the people themselves. Democracy as an ideal contemns a system of privilege based on birth and wealth. Its premises that in social climate of equal opportunities, the differences in mental and moral equipment of men can best come out. Hence, democratic ideals does not postulate a dead level of uniformity. It is a vision of society of a diverse personality. In other words, a democratic society is a society of free, equal, active and inter-citizens, each choosing his or her way of life for himself or herself and willing that others should choose theirs. Democratic ideals also refers to intergroup relations. The richness of human personality depends on the richness of the associative life of the society woven by various groups which spontaneously grow to fulfill the diverse needs of life. Modern states are not homogeneous and single-colored. They are uniformly multicolored and based on functional diversification. Autonomy of voluntary groups is what is known as institutional pluralism is a core of democratic ideal. On the international plane, democratic ideal stands for the right to self-determination and organization of interstate relations on the basis of justice, reason, and fair play. Every nationality or ethnic group should be allowed to determine its own destiny so as to attain its best form of life. Thanks to the technological revolution and media outreach, interstate contact cannot be avoided today. The democracy is doomed to extinction if such contact involves conflict or force. The moral and intellectual development of an individual requires rational arrangement of interstate relations. Democratic ideal may thus be supposed to be composite of individualism, socialism, nationalism, and pluralism. To treat this ideal of fixed dogma would, however, be doing violence to democracy. For democracy is anti-tactical to dogmatism. Democracy, as MacLever observes, is not a way of governing, rather by majority or otherwise, but primarily the way of determining who shall govern and broadly to what ends. Democracy has been well recognized as an ideal mode of governance. The system of government is democratic if it is based on popular sovereignty. In other words, it is based on the Lincolnian dictum of government of the people, by the people, for the people. Many scholars like Gatel, Bryce, Seeley, Hall, and Dice have clearly recognized the ideal mechanism of governance. All of them have laid emphasis on the people's participation in the political system. The people can take active part of the governance of the state in a number of ways. For instance, in an indirect or representative democracy, each adult member of the society can choose his representative in periodic election to be held by an impartial body like an election commission. There can also be a system of recall of the elected leaders even before the completion of their tenure. Besides, in order to ensure a more active participation of people at different levels of decision making, the system of referendum and initiative can be introduced. The first one stands for taking a popular vote of any action already decided by the government. The second one is a sort of taking an advance step by the people, say through collection of signatures by a fixed number of people to force the government for initiating some important work which are in interest of the people. At the present juncture, the system of direct control mechanism by people on democratic government has not been put to practice in India. But in this country, protest movement undertaken on a large scale can unseat a democratically elected government either at the center or in any state. Democracy is not a mere mechanism of governance. Some scholars also talk of a democratic state and democratic society. A democratic government naturally implies a democratic state. In the words of Hunsur, all that a democratic state means is that the community as a whole possesses sovereign authority and maintains an ultimate control over affairs. In addition to being a form of government and type of state, democracy is an order of society. A democratic society is one in which people enjoy political liberty and also a socio-economic equality. Because of the close links between a democratic government and a democratic state and democratic society, justice is possible for all groups and associations of people. Similarly, that cannot be true democracy without a democratic way of life. A democratic attitude to life means faith in the principle of equality for all people and the recognition of individuality of a human being. A democratic way of life is characterized by tolerance, mutual respect, and fraternity. In a sense, democracy is a large-scale experiment in public education. It stimulates interest and is informative. It tends to create a higher type of mentality among the people whom it governs. Whether general election takes place, every reasonable opinion is given a chance to express itself. Issues are discussed in all public meetings, speeches are made, articles are written, programs are outlined, and policies are propounded. The result of all this is a phenomenal rise in the popular understanding of the problems of government. In the words C.D. Burns, all government is the method education, but the best education is self-education. Therefore, the best government is self-government, which is democracy. In planning an educational curriculum, the policy makers need to practice democracy at every stage. For instance, the different categories of personnel, teacher at both primary and secondary level, curriculum framers and researchers involved in imparting teaching should be consulted at every stage in developing the curriculum for different categories of student. Otherwise, there would be serious flaws at this implementation stage. Let us not forget that democracy will have to be cultivated both inside classroom and even outside it. How does a teacher perform that role? In fact, a teacher is an opinion handler. For instance, when the teacher is meeting his or her students in the classroom, he or she must deal with all the students with justice and fairness. As a directive principle of state policy clearly supports a casteless society where all citizens should be treated alike and not determined based on class, caste, or religion. The teacher should show this impartiality in the classroom itself by encouraging the children without any discrimination. A teacher must bear in mind that he or she is not obliging anyone. A teacher is only playing his role with fairness and equity. It is a fact that better learning is always possible in a democratic climate to be generated by the teacher himself in a classroom. Even if there arises some conflicts and differences of opinion among various categories of students, an ideal teacher can always handle them with care and sympathy. In one hand, the teacher has to be well accepted by the pupils of all categories of students. The teacher should not lead any doubts in their minds about playing an impartial role. While praising the brighter students, a teacher must not discourage the weak students. On the other hand, the teacher should be in position to motivate the dull students to learn from their mistakes and show improvement in subsequent tests. When you as a teacher are dealing with the majority, your students, you have to be actually reality conscious and handle the problems related to the students in a pragmatic way. Besides, a teacher can also play the role of a community leader even outside the classroom. People from different sections of the village or mohalla may come to for advice regarding their social problems. It may be relating to the wedding of daughter, negotiating a bank loan, writing an application to an officer for redressal of grievance, etc. the teacher can play the role of a philosopher, friend and guide. By showing that quality of transparency, harmony and justice, the teacher can be a role model for the simple folk in a village. A teacher can really sensitize them about inequity and injustice in a social system and can really motivate them to demand reforms within the system. A teacher can even educate them about the dubious characters and a role played by the village thoughts or brokers in a small town. The teacher can make them aware about the number of welfare schemes introduced by the government for the upliftment of the people. It is a fact that without change of attitude of the common people, egalitarianism is not possible. A teacher is in fact better placed in the community to change the attitude of the people around him. But the teacher can perform that role only if he or she does not show any contradictory behavior himself or herself. Let us think about some common queries for the implications of democracy to teaching learning process. The first is why we should teach about democracy. We as teachers are building the future citizens of the country, and their sensitive mind must inculcate democratic spirit to learn peaceful coexistence, rationality and transparency. The second question is why should there be democratic way of life for all, including the teachers? Democracy as a way of life plays a crucial role in all the lives of all people. The teacher, being the opinion builder in a society, should specially cultivate the democratic values. We can identify some negative instances of violating democracy in a function of teacher. For instance, a teacher may be favoring a group of students and disfavoring some others. Another example can be cited when a teacher behaves in a partial way in managing the crisis situation or in taking crucial decision on evaluation work. Let us cite some positive instances where democracy is being practiced by some teachers. For instance, when teacher deals with both the bright and dull students, normal and differently able students with equal enthusiasm, he or she is following the democratic norms. Let us list some guidelines for ideal teachers as to how they can practice democracy both in the classroom situation and outside. Treat all categories of students with equality. Avoid discrimination of any sort on the basis of caste, class, creed, religion, sex, etc. Deal with low achievers with patience and tolerance. Encourage student participation in a classroom wherever possible. The more participation, the larger is the scope for democratic behavior. Wherever there are differences or conflict, deals with them democratically without any imposition or assertion of authority. While discussing any social problem with any person in locality, emphasize on equity and fair play. To conclude, democracy has been a way of life for most of the people of the world. While trying to identify the different concepts of democracy, a number of scholars have highlighted on its different manifestations. While we have seen democracy as an ideal, we have at the same time found it as a mechanism of governance. Education in democratic system has been a novel experience. Rationale for democracy in an educational curriculum has been highlighted. We have finally touched up all possible strategies or teacher educators to create the